From New York, it's That Kevin Show.
See, I knew it.
Come on, Kev. What's a few classified documents between friends?
I told you all the time. I knew it. I knew he had some too.
Here he is, That Kevin McCullough.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, my next guest is no stranger to my radio audience, and she has appeared once before on this program, only she appeared with her co-author at the time, the co-author of her latest book called Stolen Youth. She's a New York Post columnist and one of the most important voices I think that America has today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Carol Markowitz.
Hi,
Hello,
Kevin.
Carol.
Thanks for having me.
It's so good to have you back. You've been busy. You've been out selling your book, and it's gone really well. I mean, I see you popping up everywhere. But when you were writing it, did you think that the issues that are making headlines this far after its release would still be as prominent as they are? We're going to talk about one very specifically coming up, but yeah, all of the issues that you guys covered in this book, it was like you were writing it before it actually needed to be written.
Well, it's a really interesting question because, you know, some part of us definitely was concerned that, oh, maybe these issues will play themselves out. You know, we wrote it sort of during the height of the pandemic. There was a paper shortage at the time. Our release date was pushed back. We definitely had issues. And so we kept thinking, like, is this still going to be relevant when it hits? And I think it couldn't have come at a better time. I think that it came out in March, and like the last 6 months have really seen an explosion of the conversations that we're having in the book. And I think I know where you're going, but I'll let you ask the question. But I think that a lot of the topics that we cover have become front and center more than ever. Yeah.
Well, and the reason that I bring that up is that you had told me about the book before and while you were writing it, and I was kind of thinking, particularly as it pertained to the epidemic, it's the pandemic itself, that some of that probably would play itself out. But even on those issues, Carol, you still have, as recently as 2 weeks ago, people in the government floating ideas of mandates and lockdowns and masks again. And this after we've basically gone through our temper tantrum after it was all over and said, never again.
Right. You're absolutely right, because when we were writing that COVID chapter, it didn't fit with the other chapters. The other chapters sort of had solutions or strategies for families to deal with the issues that we were discussing. The COVID chapter was a little bit backwards looking, but we felt like a lot of the problems that are happening in American society really did have their roots, at least maybe they didn't start during the COVID pandemic, but they definitely were exposed during that time. So parents got to see, for example, what their kids were learning at school over their shoulder while they worked in the dining room. And that kind of thing, we felt like we had to start with COVID because it definitely launched some of the things, some of the themes in the book. I think wokeness really exploded during COVID, during that 2020 George Floyd summer, you know, where everyone on my block in Park Slope, Brooklyn, put up a defund police sign, you know, of their $4 million brownstones. So a lot of it did start there, but then a lot of it was just exposed. It turned out that our schools were run by, you know, crazy people. And I think that we didn't really know that before. I think that was something that we only really learned during that time.
Well, it's interesting because in 2022, everybody complained about the red wave not exhibiting itself. And certainly in the Senate race, the Republicans didn't take that House back, but they did win the House back. They did okay in some other contests across the country, but where they really, really did well was on school board elections across the country. 50 of the biggest, most important school districts swapped out crazies for everyday moms and dads that actually cared about things. And I'm just curious, Carol, as we're approaching the next election cycle, do you see these moms and dads, but a lot of the groups are organized for moms, do you see these groups gaining momentum going into 2024, maintaining what they have now, or have they lessened it all?
I think those groups are doing fantastic. And you can tell because the groups on the left are attacking them with such vile language.
Fury. Yeah.
Yeah. Like Moms for Liberty or Parents Defending Education, a group in which I'm on their board, which I think they're doing fantastic work. Both groups are, I think, so effective that you have the Southern Poverty Law Center having to turn them into white supremacy groups. And I think that's a joke. It's an actual joke. And I think that, one thing is, you mentioned the midterms. One thing is that a lot of the candidates that lost did not run on issues like this. They did not run on having school choice or on fighting for our public schools, two things that I think need to go hand in hand. And a lot of them didn't run on holding accountability for the COVID time and saying like who was responsible for the school closures, like why did that happen for so long in America? So I think a lot of the campaigns that we saw go down did not touch on these issues that are continue to be so important. I think the groups that you mentioned are more effective than ever, and they're fighting some really important battles. I think the porn in school libraries battle is one that maybe we wouldn't have even known about if it wasn't for groups like these.
How many times is it going to take a parent reading from a book that's in their own library getting kicked out of the school board meeting for being inappropriate before parents wake up and go, wait a minute, they're force feeding this to our kids?
That's right. Earlier this week, I posted a spreadsheet from a Greenwich, Connecticut mom who went through all the books in her child's school library and went through what her objections were. So it wasn't like, oh, she wants to ban, Alice Walker. It wasn't like, oh, she just wants to ban this book. She was like, here are the chapters here are the specific words or images that I don't think are appropriate for children. And so it forces the left, if they had any accountability, if anybody held them accountable, to say, well, I'm okay with this. I'm okay with this, pornographic book, or maybe just I'm okay with this chapter on a very graphic rape that exists in a lot of books. A lot of the books featured in that chart. But that's what parents need to do. They need to put the left on their defensive and say, look, here's what we object to. Which of this do you find okay?
Yeah. Well, it's the book is fantastic. Stolen Youth is the name of it. Bethany Mandel is the co-writer for the book, and Carol, of course. Carol and Bethany are both longtime contributors to my radio work and have been writing about things concerning their children for many, many years. And in some ways, Carol, you alluded to this earlier, but I just want to really emphasize it. These were issues that were already becoming problematic before COVID.
Right.
And had parents been as awake as they became during COVID, they probably would have addressed them earlier.
Yeah. And look, I'm a very politically active person. I'm very involved in my children's life. But, had you told me before COVID, hey, there's a bunch of pornographic books in your kid's school library, I would have said, what? That's crazy, Kevin. Why would anybody do that? And so I think that something like that, for example, was exposed. And I would have never thought that. Another thing is, as we mentioned in the book, the teachers' colleges have been completely ideologically captured. They're using Marxist textbooks to teach the teachers. So we have a situation where if you feel confident, I live in a red state, I live in Florida, as you know, if you feel confident that, oh, I live in a red state, this doesn't bother me, which by the way, is an idea that I came across a lot during this book tour. Like, oh, this is not part of my problem. I live in a red state. I live in a red town. This is all coming for you because the teachers' colleges, then the teachers go throughout the country and teach the kids all over the place. And I have lots of examples of red enclaves having these problems. COVID made me see a lot of things clearer and made me look at, conspiracy theories maybe a little bit differently. Well, there's no doubt that you're getting the word out now. Again, Stolen Youth is the book. We're coming right back from Times Square with Carol Markowitz. Stay with us.
Ready or not, we'll be right back.